Hello, this is Serp from the Breakfast Club server, which is a Discord club server or Discord server where we play Exceed fighting game system. We recently held an event called Customs Potluck, where everyone chooses a custom to bring something they think is interesting to show off to people and exchange between games. And at the end, we have everyone fill out a form, vote on a character they were interested in, they thought was cool, to learn more about the design of through these interviews. So this month we have as our winner Morichika Rinnosuke, who was designed by Bluellama1, who I have with me today.
Hello.
Hello. And they were also brought to the tournament by Aevusonian, who's also here for a bit of the player perspective.
I am Aevusonian.
This is true. So, Rinnosuke is a character from the Touhou project series, in the print works, I believe, so a bit of an interesting choice for design. So, to jump right into a bit of an overview question, because I know there's an interesting answer for this, how do you describe Rinnosuke as a character in Exceed as he relates to his source material? What traits did you really want to represent in this design?
Aevusonian, it's all you.
Oh, well that's the trick. Um, he doesn't at all. This character is not Rinnosuke in the slightest. Um, a little while back, Blue and I were talking about another character, which for reasons I'll let Blue talk about, he didn't want to actually make that character. At which point I pitched the idea: what if you just made it Rinnosuke? Because I don't think anyone actually is going to want to make Rinnosuke, for one. And for two, I don't think anyone who is actually a fan of Rinnosuke, who in source is essentially a do nothing shopkeeper who sits around all day. Um, I don't think anyone who's excited about that character and really wants to see him exceed would actually complain if this completely insane design was how he was portrayed.
You do see him chilling in a lot of these
So
arts, yeah.
what was that?
You do see him kind of chilling out in a lot of the art, so
Yeah. The art really shows a wide range of Renosuke actions that he takes, such as sitting in his shop and playing a guitar. Um, so this character, despite being themed entirely as being Renosuke, is not actually Renosuke. This is Dante from Devil May Cry.
fascinating. So, I guess Dante then. Any notes on how you wanted to adapt Dante as an Exceed character, and how maybe they overlapped with Rinnosuke in any way?
Uh, what's the like warning that you get at the start of some fictional works that are um deliberately doing like political satire? Any and all
Resemblances. Yeah.
resemblances are mental. I don't personally know a lot about Rinnosuke. I actually learned a little bit about Rinnosuke via uh deciding to make this skin for the character that I was actually making, but that wasn't really something that I considered beforehand. But like through talking about it, there is some humorous similarities between Renosuke, uh, the world's worst shopkeeper ever, who collects legendary artifacts, big and small, legendary artifacts like a computer,
True.
Yeah.
which for his setting would be pretty fucking legendary. Uh, and Dante, who is of course a badass demon hunter, who is himself half demon, uh, and through most of his journeys has collected many a effectively legendary artifact via taming the bosses. Uh, the reason why I didn't want to make Dante, just to start with that, since it's relevant,
Yeah, yeah.
is twofold. I wanted the this is like the Dante custom that is like called Dante to be made by someone else because I've made a bunch of like pretty relevant characters already, and ones from like things that I probably care more about than I do Devil May Cry. Um, but I did want like what I wanted out of Dante to exist as a playable design because I had enough of an idea of what I wanted out of the character. My initial plan was to make it like Seymour Skinner or some other like random like cartoon
Oh, like
character that
okay. See,
similar to Kurnosuke,
probably similar
like no one
vibes.
is gonna care or complain about. if they're done in a very weird way.
But designing like a character from Touhou might actually be a bit of a bigger tip that something's off here, because we generally don't have all these mechanics for Touhou characters. But
You're telling me that Touhou characters don't have cancels, crits, and overdrive?
not commonly.
Crazy.
Yeah, it is actually a worthwhile note. This character was originally supposed to be released on April Fools to make it even more blatantly obvious that despite being a real design for a character, this is probably not actually Rinnosuke. There's
Yeah.
something wrong here.
Yeah. So
Uh,
yeah. Go ahead.
Something that I find funny from like the feedback I've received on the character from people reading it naively is that it seems like the intersection between Rinnosuke, the Touhou character, and Dante is roughly uh a like deadbeat who's just like constantly like picking up shit off the ground and throwing it at you, which is basically what Dante does in most of his games with regard to like the weaponry he uses.
They do have a lot of things in their kit. 3 ultras and
Yeah.
6 specials.
Yeah.
Yeah, naming all of these specials and ultras and boosts required actually reading through the source material that Rinnosuke comes from. So when the idea was pitched of making it Rinnosuke and the realization dawned that you would actually have to name all of these cards, you can't just name the character card Rinnosuke. That then required actually reading through all of it. So I spent about a week after that reading Curiosities of Lotus Asia
It's a real research.
I
to have
really
appropriate
appreciate
source
that, by the way.
context.
That along with the art assistance was a really big help with actually like selling the character,
Yeah, yeah.
and I definitely could not have done it without you.
The cooperation. So there is, as mentioned, a lot here, like 9 cars, criticals, overdrives. How did you get started trying to design all of that and envisioning how the resource flow would kind of work out?
Oh well, that's actually part of why I pulled all these guys up here is that I've been experimenting both with how to make a stylish character in Exceed for a long time, and also because of that, I have a lot of experience with designing systems and engines that actually like function despite the hunger. So like here on this lowest level, we have Reese and Zolt, and like Zolt is like very obviously these are printed characters. I
Yeah.
didn't make these. Zolt is very obviously like very Dante inspired, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, like the way that you got to do Dante is like you got to have hard combo mechanics like this, and I think that these just like generally don't work in Exceed.
Yeah.
I think there is designs where this kind of thing works, but I think that Zolt shows exactly why this doesn't work and also why it doesn't really feel like Dante, despite, me making this joke Dante that literally starts as Hunter of Men and is a buffed version of Zolt to play into the joke.
Oh, I see.
Which like I made this as a low effort April Fool's joke. This is not a real design, and this is another part of why I was dissatisfied is despite saying that multiple times and saying like please someone make a real Dante, no one ever actually like has taken me up on that request. So it's like, okay, well, I hate this Dante. I hate this Dante that I made a lot because I didn't actually make it. I did as little effort as possible.
That's
Uh,
the only Dante people
I
ever see.
and so I wanted something that more closely felt like what I thought was interesting about the character, with regard to playing the character, while also like capturing some of the personality of the character. Because I feel like this doesn't really do that, and part of why this doesn't really do that is because it's entirely about robbing the opponent of agency in ways that can be stylish, but aren't necessarily very interesting, aren't conducive to making an interesting game of Exceed.
Yeah.
So, for context, Vernal is from a 2D Metroidvania platformer game, uh, and it actually has like a Devil May Cry esque combat system. It's very cool. The reason why I built her like Reese instead of like Zolt is partially related to like the gimmick of that game, which is that enemies have like stun stun health, and you have to like deplete them of their stun health for them to become stunned, and then you can do like crazy Devil May Cry combos on them. Which notably, that also is a mechanic that exists in Devil May Cry itself, which is something that people love to forget when thinking about how Dante should work. You don't just immediately start comboing enemies like crazy. You have to like actually work them into a state where they can get comboed. This is especially relevant in higher difficulty difficulty modes in Devil May Cry.
Yeah.
Um,
I do see a bit of this
Heavy-
ability kind of got inherited by Rinnosuke.
yeah, you can basically see that. Like, my conclusion is that it's much more fun for a character who is meant to stylishly combo you to play more like Reese, where it's all about throwing mix-ups that are really threatening, rather than the ludicrous absolute safety of Zolt.
Yeah.
Which is about all I'll say about Zolt, because I don't want to sit here and complain about Zolt for an hour. Tevi is similar to Vernal in that she comes from a game that has a stylish combat system that has like some DMC-ish influence, but is also doing its own thing, which is like part of why I built Tevi the way I did. Of relevance here is also like I built these two characters together. These are meant to feel kind of Season 7-esque. Johnny Turbo is a little weird because Johnny Turbo, throw down this, but you can kind of even see it just from his character card. But Johnny Turbo also is another character that has a shitload of cards.
Yeah.
And also has cancels and criticals. So not exactly adhering to the Guilty Gear design philosophy in that way. But you can see that this, along with Ren, who has an overdrive and then also criticals. You can see me experimenting with making a stylish character who has access to additional mechanics that provide gauge pressure, and then also like balancing out that gauge pressure with different ways to generate it for the character's needs. Which for Johnny Turbo is like, oh yeah, this character needed like a shitload of gauge generation, so he has a bunch of free gauge buttons, which we can see that trend continue with Rinnosuke. And Ren needs less, but also needs a lot more force, which is why he has super prep.
Yeah.
So like, the character's got like tools that allow them to like actually function. Anyways, back to Rinnosuke, also known as Dante. Because I already like had a general idea of where things stand, I accidentally shuffled Johnny Turbo's character card into his deck. Because I knew where things stood with like Johnny Turbo, I had a pretty decent idea of about how much gauge generation I needed to give the character relative to demands for the character to flow right. And the flow also is you have a million things that are all compelling to spend gauge on, and none of them are clearly and obviously correct. So it is more about player preference and value than it is about doing any one thing.
The expression.
So, yeah, player expression is really important to Devil May Cry, obviously, and in my opinion, is important to a character that accurately adapts it into Exceed. So this character is meant to have a large degree of player expression available to you via how you are spending your resources.
That is cool. So, you pointed out you have a lot of ways to spend gauge, and you have specific ways to get the gauge back. And you want this to feel interactive for the opponent to some extent, right?
Yes, that is very important for the character to be able to do the cool, dumb shit and not have it also be absurdly tilting for the opponent.
Yeah. So there's kind of a tension here between you want things that feel worth spending all your resources on, but you also want there to be a possibility for it to not work out, a possibility for the opponent to like play around it. So how do you kind of decide what rewards you get for your expenditures?
Well, similar to most Exceed characters, it's related to risk reward. So something like this, Dramatic Sammy, is allowed to have absolutely nuts reward, because if the opponent wants to filter Dramatic Sammy, they most of the time can. In the past, I have erroneously said they always can, and then Aevusonian got owned. So. And similarly, when you are forcing through value, aside from this big dumb 5 gauge ultra, when you're forcing through value, it is mostly going to be to the tune of like 5-ish damage with something like Kusanagi no Tsurugi.
Yeah, pretty sick.
Which, like, if you read this, like, it reads good. It's Totsugeki, but I just added on a crit that makes it even safer than Totsugeki.
Poor guy's pretty good.
So, like, the less safe you get, the more reward you get. So this is like really expensive but reasonably rewarding, especially when played EX. Which, if you play at EX, then like you're consuming a non-trivial amount of resources doing that.
Regulations up the 1 to 364.
Pretty epic shape.
Mhm.
This is like more consistent, so it's less rewarding. This is literally a kick, and like even with everything the character's got, he has season 7 boosts. So the most this can ever be is like a speed 6 kick, and that's if you invest like a lot into it.
Yeah.
And then like it's a kick. It has kick-like properties. You'd have to really invest for it to be both a speed 6 and also power 7 kick, which is where it starts to do really unfair things. And that's kind of just how it went. The options are meant to be more interesting than they are necessarily interesting, and also good via like interactions rather than necessarily just raw reward. Which is why you have stuff like this, which is just like straight up a power crept version of a double power crept version of whip crack, which is one of his old specials.
I see.
But like if you don't crit this, which like the crit pressure also makes this character more interesting because it means that it's the same property as with SF characters, where the decision to crit on a wild swing is very meaningful, and if you don't crit on a wild swing, you might get owned. So the character's wild swings are like double nerfed by the fact that they're a cancel character and then also a crit character.
It is kind of notable that they have crits on every attack, it seems like. I know most Street Fighter characters each only have 3 or so.
Yeah, that's something that I've experimented with basically from the moment that I started making customs with something like my old Slayer design, which had a lot of large, meaningful crits that turned the cards from like okay to like god cards. But similar to what we got going on here, the reward was generally proportional to the risk, and reward was generally proportional to what you were spending on it, and then also the character had like a lot of things that made it so that if you weren't committing properly, you got owned.
Yeah.
And then also like you only are able to do so many payouts when you have a character that has that much resource demand on them at all times.
Makes sense. It
So
does.
like even if you are trying to play as safe as possible, you are also committing to playing in a very low tempo way.
Yeah. Definitely seems like they want to be sending at least 1 gauge on something every turn, essentially.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's also in line with the feedback I've gotten on Rinnosuke, which is that part of what makes the character very difficult is that unlike, for example, BlazBlue characters, which tend to also be very heavy on resource pressure, Rinnosuke takes a brick and puts it on the accelerator and then says, "All right, time for you to drive the car," or as it was referred to in the past, the monster truck.
Oh, true. It's going somewhere and it's running over something.
Make sure you don't tip it over.
Yeah. So speaking of spending gauge, I guess the two things I'm especially interested in hearing about is the overdrive and the ultras and their boosts, I guess. They definitely feel like they have a certain role in terms of like the player expression you mentioned.
Gonna sort them by cost.
Yeah.
That makes sense because these are the big gauge outlets, whereas like cancels, criticals, and your ability, which notably, in addition to everything else this character has an ability that also says, "Hey, you want to
Yeah.
consume gauge on this?" Which it took a little bit of iteration to get it to a point where it actually was like good feeling, but I think right now it's in a pretty good spot, which I'm
Pretty good
happy about.
value.
Um, this ultra was basically the first thing I wrote. I just thought of a very dumb shape that was approximately this committal,
Mhm. Secret 5 gauge
and this is what
ultra.
I settled on. It used to be 5 power and critical plus 4 power, but so it hit for the same amount, but the power values were spread a little bit differently. This is kind of experimental, this stat spread, because it might actually end up being a little bit too good, but we'll see.
No, but I
But
think
yeah,
this
so like
is
this is basically the first thing I wrote.
Yeah. I think this is the version of the character you released after the Potluck event. I think this was changed slightly, but
Yeah. The potluck version had I believe it was +5 power on the
Yes,
crit.
yes.
pretty big.
It was very abusable. It was very funny.
It was very funny. It did result in a character getting perfected, which is epic. That probably was going to be a perfect anyways, but it did meaningfully contribute to that perfect.
Flashy ending.
Very flashy, and that was which, like, I guess for a bit more context, when I was designing this character as Dante, I had the like flow of like character who has all of the gauge expenditure mechanics that exist and wants to interact with all of them all the time in mind, basically from the word go. Uh, and then also the like general aim of like a very execution heavy character who was able to do very stylish things via that execution, because that's how Dante works in the games. And then like more specifically than that, I was like modeling off of the like DMC4, DMC5 Dante, who can very freely switch between his weapons, guns, and styles, his swords, guns, and styles, basically at will, to do like really crazy shit all the time in exchange for having really high APM and also just like mental load of learning how to do all that stuff. Um, and then as far as like naming goes, I went through every version of Dante and I tried to represent the attacks that you would expect Dante to have for it to properly be Dante, which I'm not gonna like explicitly name any of these.
Yeah.
You can consider that a fun game. You can play at home of what is what.
Exercise left to the viewer.
It's true.
A couple of them are probably going to be pretty obvious because I have explicitly said that I made sure to include the ones that should be there. And then from there, I went through all the weapons that I thought were really cool and unique, which ended up being a lot of ones from DMC 3 and 5, and tried to incorporate as many of them as I could while also making the kit shape that I wanted. Which luckily, because Dante has so many fucking weapons and also so many fucking moves on all of those weapons, it was very easy to just pick like, oh, I want the character to have a kick, so I'm going to give him this specific weapon with this specific attack that in Exceed would be shaped like a kick. So a lot of things are just like more about like representing the weapon rather than representing a specific attack. But the character is a like holistic representation of the character from DMC 3, 4, and 5. Arguably also like 1 and 2, but those were less considered.
It's current iteration ones.
Anyways, the ultras, they're big iconic attacks. I think they're actually all 3 from DMC 5, although at least one of them is also featured in the other games, just like the specific iteration of it that is being referenced is from DMC 5. The other, big dumb kill you buttons that you can dump a lot of gauge on. This one I wrote like immediately, and then these 2 came after, but not long after. I knew roughly the shapes I wanted for them. The boosts were interesting. The main important thing boost kit wise was actually in the special kit, which is that the 4 like stances that you can switch between freely in DMC 4, 5, and also the Switch version of DMC 3. The 4 primary stances, because there's actually an additional one in DMC 4 and an additional 2 in DMC 3 if memory serves. But the primary ones are featured in the special boost kit, and they are all like big important boosts that are meant to be like cornerstones of the character's like boost game because of that. And then from there, it was mostly just thinking about like needs and how I can fit those needs aesthetically. I don't even remember what some of these are called, except for like, yeah, he has 4 stances. I know that for sure. But moving back to the ultra boosts.
Yeah.
The two like really big dumb ones are specific references to well, here's an actual spoiler. Specific references to the two unique weapons from DMC4. I'll leave it up to the viewer which is which as far as that goes, but one of them is the like gun, and one of them is the sword that are like unique to DMC4 Dante. And so like the way that I approached those is I mostly thought of them very abstractly as like a thing that gives the character a lot of nuanced set play if you like put in the time to actually learn it. And then the fantasy of a gun that can turn into basically any gun that you can think of.
Infinite options.
And that was kind of how I designed the ultra boosts. The third one is, I think, literally the last thing I designed for the kit. So it's partially filling needs, and then also partially just like more cool things that the character could have, because the character should have lots of cool things. I'm not super satisfied with name and purpose as it currently exists. I might like continue iterating on it, but the character overall works and feels cool. So like I'm mostly happy with how things are. Oh, and then also this was a question about the overdrive. The overdrive was like the second thing I wrote. It was I knew roughly the ability shape, so from there I just upgraded the ability shape to give the character a proper exceed mode. And then overdrive taken action was like also pretty much the first thing I conceptualized for the character, because like
It does kind of
the
have
exceed mode.
Yeah.
The exceed mode equivalent in Devil May Cry is pretty big and iconic, and thus it should feel really cool to use it, even if it's not necessarily correct. And I can't think of a cooler overdrive trigger than to just literally give the player an additional action of their choice.
Yeah. It kind of has the Zolt-ish vibes of being able to like do a lot of things at once, but slightly more flexible. Yeah, it's like less like you can do more things with it. I think there are less like correct things to do with it.
Yeah, and that's part of the secret sauce that I'm really happy that like I was able to do like playtesting and consultation on season 7, because that like illustrated that like so long as the end result of doing a bunch of nonsense is still a strike that the opponent can meaningfully do things about, the opponent, like both players are having a lot more fun at the table because of that.
Yeah.
So like similar to what's going on here, yeah, the character can take 2 actions per turn. Yeah, the character can take as many actions per turn as you can possibly conceive. But when the end result is that he's mostly throwing a mix-up at you, it becomes a lot easier to stomach the character occasionally taking kind of lengthy turns, because also the pure spectacle of him taking a turn in which he takes like 4 actions is kind of funny, at least.
Yeah, the place saw like I played this character too because I was in the potluck as well, and it felt like these 2 boosts made it feel like there were cool things I could do even if I wasn't really sure like where to get started on the rest of the boosts. Like, I could spend money, I can just like put some stuff into play and it'll probably help me out. But at the same time, there's like a lot of room for learning about how you can combine things, how you can put stuff together when you have enough econ and the card in hand. There's just a lot you can do with it, and I think that's really cool. As you mentioned, it kind of comes out as a interactable strike.
Yeah, and that's like also why this like just gives you power. Power makes your strike more threatening, but it doesn't actually necessarily make it better unless you have a lot of consistent attacks in your kit, which as we have already established, we have a 2 to 5 3 speed, which is like a card that loses to dive often. Literally Dramatic Sammy. A like 1 to 4 Tatsu, but it doesn't have guard. So like depending on range, it can lose to like focus,
Probably,
assault, dive if you initiate, which obviously like considering overdrive interactions isn't necessarily relevant, but like for this to actually be a 1 to 4, you need to expend additional resources on it. Otherwise, it's just a kick,
yeah.
where it loses to focus and assault consistently. This one is actually like pretty difficult to answer. It technically loses to cross usually, and if it doesn't lose to cross, it loses to assault.
Yeah.
But it is like pretty deliberate that it's just something you kind of have to hold. For a mix of character to actually work, they need to have kind of unfair tools like these that the opponent just has to say, well, at least I'm only eating 4.
At least some guaranteed value.
Yeah, and like the character speeds are mostly middling, with like middling and also not usually above curve. The exceptions are this one, which is fast, but also not above curve, so it loses to like EX grasp. And then like you have range 4 presence that is above curve, but is only above curve to the extent that regular characters are allowed, which is speed 5.
Yeah.
Which is relevant because that means that these both usually lose to cross if you care about them. And like the way that you make it so that they don't lose to cross is something that makes it so that they aren't more threatening, which is you play something like this. Which, to be fair, this does actually make this more threatening, but also this is the one that requires you to invest all of your money into it for it to actually really do anything.
Yeah. The draw spend interaction is kind of cool there, but
But yeah, so like doing a lot of things is much more fair and much more fun when their end result is not throwing, for example, not to reference any printed Exceed characters, but a 7-speed spike.
seen that somewhere before. Yeah.
So this character is basically designed to just not actually have that be an option ever, unless you make it your life's mission to do that and nothing but that, and also expend all of your money on doing exactly that.
At which point you probably lose the game.
Yeah.
At which point you are committing
Maybe
to
you
hitting the
win-
opponent for 10 and no more ever.
Yeah. You win one strike and then you're out of money. I think the season 7 boosts lend themselves to that pretty well too. Pretty.
Yep.
Modest
Pretty intelligently
stats.
designed boost set.
Yeah.
And also a boost set that gives you a little bit of additional gas, which certainly helps things along. But obviously, this character has very special needs because he is also similar to Johnny Turbo, not really a Season 7 character. Season 7 characters don't have anything like this.
Yeah.
No 3 force cost ultra boosts in Season 7.
John stuff was all free, but you got a lot to spend money on here.
Yep.
So yeah, you did mention that name and purpose is something you were thinking of iterating on further. Do you have any other broad thoughts on the current state of this design? Does it feel like it's achieving what you wanted it to do? Anything you've been thinking of changing?
I think that this character has, by and large, been a design success, basically from the word go. And it's mostly just been about small tweaks and iteration to make it so that every part of the kit has its proper place. Which, funny enough, means that like tuning the character has mostly been about making decision making more difficult.
It's always fun.
But that's something that I just generally like for out of characters usually. My main complaint with name and purpose is that it's a little bland. It serves a function, but it's not very interesting. And I think it's the only tool in the kit that is just serves a function and isn't very interesting. I think flower viewing is very dumb, but it's very dumb in a way that I'm mostly fine with. The character needs a lot of cards and enjoys having a small speed boost, and also it lets you do kind of cool things with the recursion boost.
Oh yeah, that's true. Kind of get to choose what you're spending there.
Which, like, the recursion boost notably interacts in kind of cool ways with a lot of these the boosts that have force costs on them because of how it works.
Yeah, you spend force and then you can get it back later as a boost. Yeah, good to hear that he feels like he's doing what he's meant to do. To kind of dive into that a bit further, Aevusonian, how did you think Rinnosuke or Dante felt to play? Did it line up with the kind of
Those characters,
yeah.
This character's awesome. Like, the whole reason I brought the character to the potluck was because I played this character a few times before, like, he even had any names in the cards. It was just, you know, blank CCG cards. And I was like, yeah, there's so many cool things that you get to decide to do. And the way you choose which ones you're doing really expresses like what you actually enjoy about playing Exceed. Whereas like, yeah, I want to take this character to an event where everyone's forced to play him. That's awesome. I get to see so many different people interact with this bizarro, as stated, monster truck. Um, where you by design you can't take a break. You have no opportunity to take a turn off. You must make a choice every single turn or you die. But the choices you can make are all distinct and meaningful in ways that really express not just your mastery of the character, but also your mastery of Exceed. Um, an interaction I really, really enjoyed during the potluck was I discovered some dirty secret tech, um, which was like my 15th game on the character, and I hadn't noticed that you could do this before. Um, in which I used a Doomsday device to go get appraisal from my deck. Uh, Appraisal onto the field, name block to discard my opponent's block while at range one, cancel into the big dumb 3 gauge ultra, where now I have removed. I have either gotten rid of block or scouted out. Oh, they actually have EX grasp. This isn't safe. Uh, and then played this afterwards, and I felt like a genius. Immediate next round, where my opponent had control of the character, they remembered what I did. They had learned from my technique, and I got obliterated because I forgot that this character could do that.
The complicated. I did kind of mention
Um,
it in to both you and Split, I believe, but like seeing someone play this character before you get on them, I think is an interesting experience because it's kind of like you get an idea for one thing you might be able to do with them, but then like as you're actually picking up the cards, you don't necessarily have like the same options available to you, so you're just kind of like combining those two frameworks in a sense. It's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah. A big part of what makes the character so interesting to me is the fact that you do have this ridiculously large deck. And even though you do have more draw power than average Exceed character, you do still have to get through the deck. And so you have a pile of cards that is probably very different looking from any other time you've seen the character played, which means you need to adapt to what you have and actually finding the line that you want to take with that pile of pretty unique cards is awesome.
Yeah,
There's so many points of divergence in that.
I know there's a similar thing. This is more of a Johnny Turbo point, but he functions in a way where like you have a pretty small hand all the time, but you can kind of just like spend what you have and then get a new hand the next turn. But just like being able to combine things in almost any way is a similar
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Like yeah,
If you have the resources, you can spend them. That is a a very consistent thing with this character is that you almost always have the opportunity to say, "All right, my hand, my gauge, I need them not. My beautiful vision is out there. I can throw everything I have to reach it, and then I throw some sick mix up, which like the end result of throwing all your resources at the strike is you have like +2 power and hit move one, and then also you get your resources back if you like stun the opponent or something. And then you whiff the combo and look like the biggest idiot in the world.
Wild Swing Cross.
It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for all your thoughts thus far. I guess do you have any other, either of you, any other thoughts on the design of Rinnosuke? Any other ideas you want to like share from him, put out into the world for everyone else designing customs?
I think that designing this character was really fun, but I would probably recommend starting smaller and building your way up. I think that a good way to practice building a character like this is to just make a regular season 7 character, which we got Tevi as our stand-in for a regular season 7 character, because a lot of the thinking that you're going to be making on how to make a character like that work is also going to transfer directly into making a character like this work.
Yeah.
Um, I think that having all the mechanics is interesting, but also is very unwieldy. I think that the combinations are very interesting and also are very underexplored. I think that crits and overdrive is a very cool combination, and I would love to see more characters that do that. Um, I think that crits and cancels are very funny, and having a character that isn't built like Rinnosuke or Johnny Turbo that interacts with those mechanics might be really interesting.
You know,
Since both Johnny Turbo and Rinnosuke are very maximalist designs.
yeah. I know the
But
King of
having
Fighters season interacts with those in slightly more modest ways, but
yeah, that is true. And I guess if you want to go check out some characters that aren't epic and stylish, but do interact with multiple resource burn mechanics in kind of cool ways, you can go check that season out. Uh, Overdrive and cancels is one that I actually have basically not seen, and I think that is a very interesting combination because Overdrive lends itself very well to characters that have a lot of resource pressure. And that resource pressure being specifically gauge via cancels is kind of an interesting bit of clashing on exactly like what you want to be spending your resources on. That one is probably a kind of advanced design to make though.
I can definitely see that.
Um, Aside from those general thoughts, I alluded to it, but to like exactly state the feedback that I was given that was hilarious and also has been referenced a bunch since. Um, I do think that if your goal is to make a character that feels kind of like Kokonoe, but something different, something's different. So in the case of Rinnosuke, Kokonoe's deadbeat older brother who runs a pharmacy, uh, then this route is a very natural approach to doing that because this both plays with Exceed's um, card gamey aspects that you kind of want to touch on at least somewhat if you're trying to make a character that does funny little boost combos, and then also touches on uh some of the more interesting aspects of the like Air Dasher Exceed seasons, Blaze Blue and Guilty Gear, and how those characters like interact with the action economy. And I think Kokono exemplifies that well with her like when you exceed take another action, which is such difficult text to actually like make function on a character, but I think she does it with a plume.
Yeah, the sudden burst of activity. At least that's what it is on Kokonoi. I think it's like notably more constant here, but
Yeah. With Kokonoe specifically, it is specifically like a snap play, power play, um, gauge button, which is like kind of neat.
yeah,
And then this character is all about snap power plays, and is, as Aevusonian alluded to, um, very like reactive of like, oh, Exceed is a game where like you are forced to employ a mixed strategy because my deck is so big. My mixed strategy is going to be composed of a lot more pieces than the average character,
yeah.
and reacting to exactly the pieces you have to be forced into doing different things is like kind of neat. Characters with larger deck sizes are cool. I would recommend designing like characters that have an additional special or ultra rather than ones that have two or three, because two or three is a lot.
Yeah, just like 8 cards instead of however many.
Yeah. Which for Rinnosuke is 9, for Johnny Turbo is 10. Which like those characters being overwhelming in this way is like part of the fantasy of playing as and playing against them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, and
Also,
yeah.
since it was mentioned last time with Missing No, Rinnosuke is also definitely a Shoto.
Let's see. I did see the Tatsu. Saw the kick. Meter DP.
Fireball.
True. I can feel it.
Card that beats armor.
It's kind of like a kick.
Yeah.
The thing that Rinnosuke is lacking to be unambiguously a Shoto is a like reversal Dragon Punch shape, which to be fair, Ken doesn't have one of those either.
That's true.
Um, But what Rinnosuke has in place of having a specific like Dragon Punch is an even greater ability to just answer situations via the way his kit is shaped. So like he might not have a true reversal, but he does have like in fighting game terms like a 4-framer in a game where most characters only have like a 5-framer.
Yeah,
And that's his way to cheat on defense.
a bit of privilege.
Which is funny to say about a character who literally does not have anything but cards of middling speed, aside from, the one.
Plus spin money. Yeah, looking forward to these interviews revealing that every character is secretly Shoto.
It's funny how that
That's
works.
the secret. You won't vote for characters unless they're cool, and all the cool characters are Shotos.
Really makes you think.
Ah! Anyways, I look forward to next time when someone takes what's a character that I've designed is like that's very obviously not a Shoto.
Ikari,
Yukari?
Persona.
Yeah. That's a reasonable one. I actually could probably make a half-hearted argument that character is a Shoto.
Could be real.
He definitely has a Tatsu. And she kind of has a DP. Anyways, we're not here to talk about Yukari. We're here to talk about epic characters like Rinnosuke instead. And also, Yukari never would be voted as the favorite character.
Maybe.
Like imagining New 13 gets voted as the favorite character in a roster. Like it's just not gonna happen. I'm sorry to say.
Maybe the world's out there. Did you have any last thoughts on Rinnosuke Dante Aevusonian?
No, I gotta blab about the part that I wanted to blab about.
That's great.
Which is that this character is really cool and you should play him and explore him.
This is true. Rinnosuke is available to everyone in the Touhou thread, I believe. Read the downloads.
Yep. And if you try them out, I would love to hear feedback. I'd love to hear feedback on any customs you play of mine. It is useful both in the sense that the feedback is occasionally gives actionable things that I can like work on, and also just the knowledge that people are interacting with the customs is helpful for motivation.
This is true. But yeah, on that note, I think that's about all we have to say about Rinnosuke for now. I hope people try him out. I hope everyone enjoyed the potluck, and I hope that people look forward to the next one. Until then, thank you for watching.
Yippee!
Yay.
See y'all.